The wind came first. It moved through the dry grass like something searching for a way in. Dust lifted off the road in thin gray ribbons, curling around the wheels of a stagecoach that had no business stopping in a town this small. The driver pulled hard on the reins. "End of the line," he said. "Miss, this is Larkspur Hollow." A young woman stepped down. Her boots touched dirt that had not seen rain in weeks. She wore a plain gray traveling dress, buttoned to the throat, and carried one suitcase that looked heavier than it should for someone so small. Her name was Eleanor Hayes. She did not look like someone who could save a ranch. She looked like someone the wind might carry off if she stood too long in one place. But her eyes told a different story. They were steady. Watching. Measuring the town the way a person measures a room they may have to defend themselves in. Larkspur Hollow was not much. A general store with a sagging porch. A church with a bell that had cracked 2 winters ago. A saloon that stayed too loud past midnight. And beyond the last building, where the road turned to nothing but hoofprints, the land opened into miles of pale grass and broken fence line. Nobody came to greet her. She stood alone at the edge of the road, suitcase in hand, while the stagecoach rattled off toward the horizon and left her in a silence so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. That was when she heard the shouting. It came from somewhere past the church. A man's voice, rough with anger, and beneath it, a boy crying. Eleanor did not think. She walked toward the sound. She found them behind the feed store. A boy, no older than 9, pressed against a wall by a man twice his size. The boy's shirt was torn at the collar. His lip was bleeding. "You steal from me again," the man growled, "and I'll..." "Let him go." The words left Eleanor's mouth before she decided to say them. The man turned. He looked at her, a stranger, dust still on her shoes, hat slightly crooked from the ride, and he laughed. "This ain't your business, lady." "It is now." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. There was something in the way she stood, feet planted, spine straight, that made the man hesitate. "He took an apple," she said. "I'll pay for it. Let him go." For a long moment nobody moved. Then the man shoved the boy aside and spat in the dirt. "Fine. Keep your charity case." He walked away, boots kicking up dust, muttering something Eleanor chose not to hear. She knelt down. The boy was shaking. "You hurt?" she asked. He shook his head, though the blood on his lip said otherwise. "What's your name?" "Tommy," he whispered. "Well, Tommy." She pulled a handkerchief from her sleeve and pressed it gently to his lip. "I'm Eleanor. I just got here. Looks like this town already needed me." He almost smiled. That was the first thread. The first small stitch in a story that would soon pull an entire ranch, and one guarded cowboy's heart, back from the edge of ruin. Eleanor had come to Larkspur Hollow for one reason. The town needed a schoolteacher, and she needed a place where nobody knew her name. She had left behind a city too full of memory. A classroom where the children had grown to love her, and then, one terrible spring, a fever had taken half of them before anyone understood what was happening. She had held small hands as they went still. She had written letters to parents she could not look in the eye afterward. She told herself she was starting over. She had not told anyone the truth, that some nights she still heard the coughing in her sleep, that she flinched at the smell of vinegar and lye, that teaching again felt less like a calling and more like something she owed the world. Larkspur Hollow did not know any of this. They only knew a young woman had answered the advertisement, and that the schoolhouse, a single room with a leaking roof and 12 mismatched desks, finally had someone willing to stand in front of it. She rented a small room above the general store. She unpacked exactly what she needed and nothing more. She hung one photograph on the wall, turned it face down, and did not look at it again that first night. The next morning, she walked to the schoolhouse before the sun had fully cleared the hills. She found Tommy waiting outside the door, sitting on the step like he'd been there for hours. "You're early," she said. "Didn't want you to be alone," he answered. Something in her chest loosened, just slightly, like a knot finally given room to breathe. The ranch belonged to a man named Caleb Whitfield. Eleanor did not meet him that first week. She heard about him instead, the way people in small towns talk, in pieces, in warnings, in half-finished sentences that leave more curiosity than clarity. "Whitfield's ranch is the only thing keeping this town fed," the shopkeeper told her, counting out her change. "But it won't last the year. Banks circling like buzzards." "Why?" "Drought took the herd down to nothing." His father passed last winter, left him the debt along with the land. Man's been trying to hold it together alone ever since. Does he have family? The shopkeeper's face changed, just slightly. Had a sister. She's gone now too. It's just him and that boy. What boy? Tommy. Whitfield's his uncle. Boy's been living out there since his mother passed. Caleb won't send him to school regular, says he can't spare the time to bring him in, says the boy's needed on the ranch. Eleanor felt something tighten in her. A child, kept from learning. A ranch, on the edge of collapse. A man too proud, or too broken, to ask for help. She did not know yet that all three of these things were about to become the center of her life. She saw Caleb Whitfield for the first time on a Thursday, when Tommy did not come to school. She walked the 3 miles to the Whitfield ranch herself, her boots sinking into dust that had once been fertile soil. The fences leaned at broken angles. The barn's roof sagged like something exhausted. Even the wind here seemed tired. She found him in the yard, hauling a fallen fence post back into place, sweat soaking through his shirt despite the cool morning. He was tall, sun-worn, with hands that looked like they had not rested in years. His jaw was set in the permanent line of a man carrying more than he'd say out loud. "Mr. Whitfield?" He turned. His eyes were tired but sharp, the kind of tired that came from worry, not laziness. "You're the new teacher. Eleanor Hayes. Tommy didn't come to school today. Boy's got work to do. He's 9. He's all I've got helping me keep this place standing." Eleanor looked past him, at the empty pens, the cracked water trough, the fields gone the color of old paper. "This place is going to fall down around you whether he's here or not." Something flickered in Caleb's expression. Not anger. Something closer to exhaustion finally being seen. "With respect, ma'am, you don't know the first thing about ranching." "No," she agreed. "But I know a boy who deserves to learn his letters. And I know a man who's about to lose everything trying to carry it alone." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved between them, stirring the dust at their feet. "You always this direct with strangers?" Caleb finally asked. "Only the ones who need it." He almost smiled. "Almost. Tommy'll be there tomorrow," he said, turning back to the fence post. "Now if you'll excuse me, I've got a ranch to save before winter." Eleanor did not leave right away. She stood there a moment longer, watching a man fight a battle that was quietly, visibly, losing him. And though she would never have admitted it that day, something about the sight of him, proud, exhausted, refusing to fall, planted itself in her chest and did not leave. Tommy came to school the next morning, and every morning after. Slowly, without either of them noticing exactly when it happened, Eleanor began stopping by the ranch on her way home. First to check on Tommy's reading. Then to help patch a fence when she saw Caleb struggling alone. Then simply because the walk felt shorter when it ended at his gate. Caleb never asked her to stay. He never asked her to come at all. But he stopped telling her to leave. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the fields, Eleanor found him sitting on the porch steps, staring at a letter in his hands. His face had gone pale beneath the sunburn. "Mr. Whitfield?" He did not look up right away. "Bank's giving me 30 days, he said quietly. 30 days to pay what my father owed, or they take the land. Eleanor sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "How much?" He told her. It was more money than either of them had ever held in their hands at once. "There's still a way," Eleanor said. "There's always a way." Caleb turned to look at her then, really look at her, in a way he hadn't allowed himself before. "Why do you care?" he asked. "You've known us 3 weeks." Eleanor opened her mouth to answer. But before she could speak a single word, the sound of galloping hooves cut through the evening, fast, urgent, wrong. A rider burst through the gate, pulling his horse to a violent stop in a cloud of dust. "Caleb," the man shouted, breathless, his face white with panic. "It's the herd, the whole north pasture's on fire." Caleb was on his feet before the rider finished speaking. "How bad?" "Bad. Wind's pushing it toward the barn. We need every hand we've got." He was already moving toward the stable, boots pounding the porch boards, when he turned back for just 1 second. "Eleanor, get Tommy inside. Keep him away from the smoke. I'm coming with you. This isn't. I'm not asking, Mr. Whitfield." Something passed between them in that half-second. Not permission. Recognition. He did not have time to argue, and some part of him, buried under exhaustion and pride, did not want to. "Grab the water buckets by the well," he said. "Move." The sky over the north pasture had turned a sick shade of orange. Smoke rolled upward in thick columns, staining the evening clouds. The air already tasted like ash. Eleanor ran alongside two ranch hands, buckets banging against her legs, her skirt catching on dry brush. She had never in her life run toward fire. Every instinct told her to run the other way. She kept running. When they reached the fence line, the scene was worse than she imagined. Flames moved low and fast through the dead grass, chewing toward a cluster of cattle bunched together in fear. The barn stood less than 200 yards beyond, wood dry as kindling. "Cut the fence!" Caleb shouted. "Get the cattle through the gap before it reaches them." Eleanor threw herself into the work without thinking. She hauled water. She beat at small flames creeping toward dry brush with a wet feed sack until her arms burned. She helped drive panicked cattle through a gap in the broken fence, her voice hoarse from shouting over the roar of the fire. At one point, a wall of flame surged sideways, faster than anyone expected, cutting off the path back to the wagon. "Eleanor!" Caleb's voice cracked through the smoke. He was there before she had time to be afraid, grabbing her arm, pulling her hard to the left, out of the flame's path, both of them stumbling into the dirt as heat rushed past where she had been standing seconds before. For a moment neither of them moved. His hand was still wrapped around her arm. Her heart was hammering, not only from the fire. "You could have been killed," he said, his voice low, rough with something that wasn't anger. "So could you," she answered. "Every day. Alone." He looked at her then, soot streaked across his face, firelight reflected in his eyes, and for the first time since she'd arrived in Larkspur Hollow, he did not look like a man guarding a wall. He looked like a man who had almost lost something he hadn't let himself name yet. "Get up," he said finally, pulling her to her feet. "We've still got work to do." They fought the fire until well past midnight. By the time the last flames died into smoldering black earth, half the north pasture was gone. The barn had survived, barely, its west wall scorched black. 3 cattle were lost. The rest had scattered into the hills, and it would take days to gather them again. Caleb stood at the edge of the ruined field, shoulders slumped, watching smoke curl up from the earth like something exhaling its last breath. "That was the last good grazing land I had," he said quietly. "Without it, I can't feed what's left of the herd through winter." Eleanor stood beside him, her dress ruined, her hands blistered, ash in her hair. "We'll figure it out," she said. "There's nothing to figure out." His voice was flat, hollow with exhaustion. 30 days to pay the bank. No pasture. Half a herd. I should let them take it. You don't mean that. Don't I? He turned to her, and for the first time she saw beneath the proud, steady exterior he wore like armor. She saw a man who had buried his father, inherited his debts, taken in a grieving 9-year-old boy, and had been quietly drowning ever since without a single person to share the weight. "I mean it some nights," he admitted. "I mean it when I can't sleep for thinking about what I'll tell Tommy if the bank takes this place. This is the only home he's ever really known." Eleanor reached out, hesitated, then gently touched his arm. "You are not going to lose this ranch," she said. "Not while I'm still here. You don't even know how to save it." "No," she said. "But I know how to fight for something worth keeping. I've had practice." Something in the way she said it made him look at her more closely. "What do you mean by that?" She looked away, toward the dark hills. "Another time," she said softly. "Tonight, you need rest more than you need my history." He did not push. But he noticed, the flicker of pain that crossed her face, quickly hidden, like a door closing before he could see what was behind it. It was the first thread of a mystery neither of them was ready to pull yet. The days that followed changed everything between them, though neither said so out loud. Eleanor came to the ranch every evening after school, no longer pretending it was only for Tommy's sake. She helped mend fences. She learned to milk the one remaining cow that hadn't scattered in the fire. She sat at the kitchen table late into the night, going over the ranch's ledgers with Caleb by lamplight, searching for anything, any debt that could be delayed, any asset that could be sold, any path that didn't end in losing everything. "You're good with numbers," Caleb said one night, watching her work through the accounts with quiet precision. "I taught mathematics, before this," she said. "Before Larkspur Hollow." "Before what, exactly?" She hesitated. The lamp flickered between them. There was a school, she said finally. A city school. 50 children in 3 rooms. I loved every one of them. What happened? Her hands went still on the ledger. Fever came through in the spring. Took 11 of them in 8 days. I held 2 of them while her voice broke. She pressed her lips together, steadying herself. I couldn't save them. I could only be there. Caleb did not say anything right away. He simply reached across the table and covered her hand with his, a small, steady weight. That's not a failure, he said quietly. That's love, given all the way to the end. Eleanor looked up at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. Nobody's ever put it that way before. Maybe nobody's looked at it close enough. The lamp burned low between them. Outside, an owl called once across the dark fields. Neither of them moved their hands. For the first time since the fever took her students, Eleanor Hayes did not feel like she was running from something. She felt, for one quiet moment, like she had arrived somewhere. Tommy noticed before either of them admitted it to themselves. You like her, he said to Caleb one morning, swinging his legs from the porch rail while Eleanor's small figure grew smaller down the road toward the schoolhouse. She's a friend, Tommy. You smile different when she's here. Caleb did not answer that. He busied himself checking a saddle strap that did not need checking. I like her too, Tommy added, softer. She doesn't look at me like I'm just extra work. She looks at me like I matter. Something tightened in Caleb's chest. He thought of his sister, gone now 2 years, and the promise he'd made at her graveside to raise her son right, to give him more than survival. He'd been so focused on keeping the land beneath their feet that he'd nearly forgotten the boy needed more than a roof. Eleanor had reminded him of that without ever saying a word about it. Get your boots on, he said, clearing his throat. Chores don't do themselves. But he watched the road a moment longer than he needed to, until Eleanor's shape disappeared over the rise. The 30 days shrank to 20, then 15. Eleanor spent every spare hour searching for a way to save the ranch. She wrote letters to a distant cousin who had once worked in cattle trade. She spoke to the bank clerk, gently prying loose whatever information he'd share. She even convinced the reluctant shopkeeper to consider a deal, grain and supplies on credit, repaid once the herd was sold in spring. It was not enough. Everyone in town could see it. The number the bank wanted was too large, the time too short. Then, on a gray Tuesday afternoon, a stranger rode into Larkspur Hollow. He was well-dressed, out of place among the dust and worn boots of the town, his horse groomed to a shine that did not belong to ranch work. He asked directions to the Whitfield property with the confident tone of a man used to being obeyed. Eleanor was walking home from school when she saw him pass. Something about him made her stomach tighten, not fear exactly, but a sharp, sudden unease, like recognizing a storm before the clouds had fully gathered. She quickened her pace toward the ranch. She arrived just as the stranger was dismounting in the yard. Caleb stood on the porch, arms crossed, jaw tight. Mr. Whitfield, the stranger said smoothly, extending a gloved hand Caleb did not take. Name's Everett Marsh. I represent an investment group out of the capital. We understand you're facing some financial difficulty. News travels fast. Bank clerks talk, if you pay them enough. Marsh smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. I'm prepared to offer you a generous sum for this land. Enough to clear your debt entirely, with money left over. You could start fresh somewhere else. No more fighting a losing battle. This land isn't for sale. Everything's for sale, Mr. Whitfield, at the right price. And in 15 days, when the bank forecloses, you'll get nothing at all. I'm offering you a way to walk away with dignity instead of losing it all with none. Eleanor stepped into the yard then, her presence drawing Marsh's attention. And who's this? He asked, looking her over with an appraising glance that made her skin crawl. The schoolteacher, I presume. I've heard about you too, Miss Hayes. Her blood went cold. How do you know my name? Marsh's smile widened, slow and knowing. Larkspur Hollow is a small town, Miss Hayes. People talk. Especially about a woman who left the city so suddenly, right after that unfortunate business at the schoolhouse there. The color drained from Eleanor's face. Caleb's eyes moved from Marsh to Eleanor, confusion and concern flickering across his features. What is he talking about? Eleanor said nothing. Her hands had begun to tremble. Marsh's gaze lingered on her a moment longer, something calculating behind his polite smile, before he turned back to Caleb. 15 days, Mr. Whitfield. Think carefully. Not everyone in this town is who they claim to be. He swung back onto his horse with practiced ease. I'll return for your answer. He rode off down the same dusty road he'd arrived on, leaving a silence behind him that felt heavier than smoke. Caleb turned to Eleanor. Eleanor. What did he mean by that? She opened her mouth. Closed it again. And for the first time since she'd arrived in Larkspur Hollow, Eleanor Hayes, steady, unshakable Eleanor Hayes, looked like she was about to run. She did not run. Her feet wanted to. Every instinct that had carried her across 3 states and into a town where nobody knew her name told her to walk away before the truth caught up to her. But she looked at Caleb, at the confusion in his eyes, the hurt he was trying to hide, and something steadier than fear held her in place. Come inside, she said quietly. Please. I'll tell you everything. They sat at the same kitchen table where they had once gone through ledgers by lamplight. Tommy was out gathering eggs, and for once the house was fully quiet, holding its breath along with them. The school I told you about, Eleanor began, her hands folded tight in her lap. The fever. I didn't tell you all of it. Caleb waited. He did not push. He simply waited, the way he had learned to wait for a spooked horse to settle on its own. There was a school board meeting, after the worst of it passed, she continued. They needed someone to blame. It's easier than blaming a sickness nobody could stop. They said I should have noticed sooner. That I should have closed the school before it spread. They said, her voice caught. They said I failed those children. That's not true. I know that now. I didn't know it then. I resigned before they could dismiss me. I packed one bag and I left before the newspapers could print my name beside the story. I told myself I was starting fresh. I never told anyone here because I was ashamed, and because some part of me still believed what they said. Caleb reached across the table, the same way he had that night with the ledgers, and took her hand. Eleanor. Look at me. She lifted her eyes to his. You didn't fail those children, he said. You stayed. You held their hands. You gave them everything you had, right up to the last minute, and that is not failure. That is the bravest thing I have ever heard of. Tears slipped free before she could stop them. Then why does it still feel like drowning? Because grief doesn't leave just because someone tells you it's not your fault, he said gently. It leaves when you let people carry it with you. She looked at him for a long moment, at this tired, proud, quietly gentle man who had somehow, without either of them noticing, become the person she trusted most in the world. Why are you not afraid of me? She whispered. Everyone else was. They looked at me like I was something broken. You're not broken, Eleanor. His thumb moved softly over her knuckles. You're someone who loved too much to walk away, even when it cost you everything. That's not something to fear. That's something to build a life around. Outside, the wind moved gently through the fields, no longer carrying smoke, only the smell of cooling earth after rain that had finally, mercifully, begun to fall. Everett Marsh returned exactly when he said he would. 15 days had shrunk to 1. He rode into the yard at midday, his shined boots stepping carelessly through mud left by 2 days of steady rain. Caleb stood waiting on the porch. Eleanor stood beside him. Tommy watched from the doorway, sensing the weight of the moment even if he did not fully understand it. Mr. Whitfield. Marsh dismounted slowly, savoring the moment. I trust you've had time to consider my offer. I have. And? The land isn't for sale. Not now. Not ever. Marsh's smile faded, replaced by something colder. Then tomorrow, the bank forecloses, and you'll walk away with nothing. All that pride, and you'll have nothing to show for it but an empty road. Maybe, Caleb said. But it'll be my empty road. Not yours. Marsh's eyes shifted to Eleanor. And you, Miss Hayes. Does this town know yet? About the school? About the children you couldn't save? They know, Eleanor said, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her. I told them myself, this morning, before school began. Every parent. Every family. Marsh blinked, the first crack in his composure. I told them the truth, she continued. That I stayed until the very end. That I have grieved every day since. And do you know what they did, Mr. Marsh? They forgave me. Because good people understand that love and loss can live in the same heart without one canceling out the other. That doesn't change the ranch's debt. No, Caleb said. But this might. He stepped off the porch and gestured toward the road, where a small procession was approaching, wagons, riders, the shopkeeper's cart, half the town of Larkspur Hollow moving steadily toward the ranch. Marsh's confidence faltered as the wagons drew closer and began unloading. Grain sacks. Tools. A collection jar heavy with coins and folded bills. Neighbors Caleb barely knew stepped forward with what little they could spare. When the fire took the pasture, folks around here didn't forget, the shopkeeper said, setting down a crate. This town survives because of the Whitfield ranch. Time we helped it survive back. Eleanor watched, throat tight, as person after person added to the growing pile, not enough, on its own, to clear the whole debt, but enough, combined with what she and Caleb had already gathered, enough to buy something far more valuable than money. Time. This isn't over, Whitfield, Marsh said, swinging back onto his horse, his voice tight with barely concealed anger. The bank will still come calling. Let them come, Caleb said. They'll find a ranch that isn't standing alone anymore. Marsh rode off for the final time, his shadow shrinking down the muddy road until the rain swallowed him whole. The bank clerk arrived the next morning, exactly as promised, papers in hand, prepared to deliver bad news. He found, instead, a yard full of neighbors, a partial payment that covered enough of the debt to satisfy the bank's board, and a signed agreement, quietly arranged through Eleanor's careful letters to her cousin in the cattle trade, for a fair price on next season's herd, delivered in advance. It was not a fortune. It was enough. The clerk read through the numbers twice, glanced up at the gathered crowd, and finally nodded. The Whitfield ranch stays in Whitfield hands, he said. For now, at least. Keep the payments coming, and there won't be trouble. A cheer rose up from the yard, rough and joyful, the kind of sound a place makes when it remembers it is still, despite everything, alive. Tommy ran straight into Caleb's arms, laughing for the first time in longer than Caleb could remember. Caleb lifted him easily, spinning him once before setting him down, both of them breathless with relief. Eleanor stood at the edge of it all, watching, her heart so full it ached. Caleb found her there a moment later, the crowd's celebration blurring into background noise around them. We did it, he said. You did it, she corrected gently. I only helped. No. He shook his head slowly, taking her hand in both of his. You saved this ranch, Eleanor. But that's not even the part I'm most grateful for. What is, then? You saved me. Before you came here, I was so busy holding on to this land that I forgot what it was for. You reminded me. This ranch was never just dirt and fences. It's supposed to be a home. And I don't want it to be a home without you in it. Eleanor's breath caught. Caleb. I know it's fast, he said, before she could finish. I know you came here to start over quiet, and maybe you didn't plan on any of this. But I'm not asking you to stay because I need help running this ranch. I'm asking because I can't imagine watching the sun set over these fields without you standing beside me. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small, simple ring, his mother's, worn smooth by decades of quiet love. Eleanor Hayes, he said, voice steady despite the tremble in his hands, will you stay? Not for a season. Not for the ranch. For good. Will you build a life here, with me and Tommy, for as long as we're given? Around them, the celebration seemed to fade into a hush, as though the whole town understood this moment deserved its own silence. Eleanor looked at the ring, then at Caleb's face, open and honest and terrified in the particular way only real love could make a strong man feel. She thought of the fever that had taken so much from her. She thought of the children she had lost, the shame she had carried alone for so long, the road that had led her, against every plan she'd made, to this exact yard, this exact man, this exact boy who had run into her life over one stolen apple. She thought that perhaps this was what healing actually looked like. Not forgetting. Not moving on. But learning to build something new out of everything that remained. Yes, she said, tears bright in her eyes, a smile breaking free like sunlight after weeks of rain. Yes, I'll stay. Forever. Caleb slid the ring onto her finger, and the yard erupted in cheers all over again, Tommy's laughter rising loudest above them all. That evening, as the sky turned soft gold over Larkspur Hollow, Eleanor stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching Caleb teach Tommy to mend a section of fence in the fading light. Their laughter drifted across the yard, easy and warm, the sound of a family finding its footing. She touched the ring on her finger and looked out at the land stretching toward the horizon, scarred by fire, soaked by rain, and somehow, through all of it, still standing. Still hers now, too. The wind moved gently through the grass one last time, no longer searching for a way in. It had already found its home.